Jacksonville. The child was born and couldn't sit still. 86 years later with no regret. You know that man can't sit still yet. The Great Depression couldn't get him down. He worked for his dad's store in town, collecting money in small amounts for poor whites and blacks in their furniture accounts. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. Stetson Kennedy wants us all to be free. As he'd collect, he'd talk to folks. He'd hear legends, tales, songs, and jokes. Now this fine treasure he'd record and write. He was colorblind, didn't see black and white. Writer's project for the WPA. With Zora Neale Hurston, he earned his pay. Crackers and blacks, they talk for hours. It was a barefoot history of this land of flowers.
On the 16th of March, one day before St. Paddy's Day, incidentally, we'll have special programming on St. Paddy's Day coming up tomorrow, the 17th of March. Our episode today, The Week That Was, from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. We have Uncle Carl Robe here. He'll be talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and South by Southwest, the festival. We'll start off with Uncle Carl today, because what we want to do is bring several things into light. The recent tragedy in New Zealand, and the 49 plus people, there's some that in very critical condition there, shot by a white supremacist that put his manifesto, and he also filmed the event on Facebook. There have been a number of recriminations about that particular situation, and also that the firearms he had in New Zealand were licensed to him. There were at least five different weapons involved, semi-automatic weapons. But the debate is around the whole idea of using nationalism as a weapon against immigrants. Now, there are many right-wing parties, and evidently this person traveled around Europe, and he also visited places like Afghanistan, etc., and when we get to his story from the Post, we'll highlight some of his travels and his like of the people in their country. But he looked at people that were in his country that came from other countries, Muslims, etc., as invaders. Now, that's the same terminology used by DJ Trump. And this is where the whole situation exacerbates itself. Uncle Carl will be talking about Southwest, and in the presentation of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she highlights Ronald Reagan's 1976 campaign, where amongst other items of race baiting, he talked about a welfare queen in Chicago that drove a Cadillac, etc., etc. Very interesting story. Will appends the, I believe it's the Sun-Times article. Very long. I read it. And we'll talk about it a little bit here as a setup piece to what is going on currently and what happened in Christchurch, New Zealand, and what's happening in the U.S. with these various right-wing parties across Europe, whether it be there or in some of the satellite states, Poland, etc., there is an adjustment to the world as we see it now. People are immigrating to various countries, some for economic reasons, some for political reasons, some just to find a better climate. And I believe New Zealand takes in about 15 or 1,600 per year. Not very many at all. But some of the other countries, there's a very thin line. Example would be Japan or Germany. They have an older population and are in need of people to perform various jobs. So they must rely on immigration to keep the, as they say, the nation humming along. Now that is a very serious problem. It's the same situation we have here in the U.S., that numbers and numbers of thousands of jobs that are not being filled, either because they don't pay enough compensation, or that the particular skill, truck drivers for instance, is in demand. And on the supply side, there just aren't enough people there to do these jobs. So it becomes a question there: do you import labor in, or that you just abandon those particular jobs and outsource those products, if they're producing products, from other countries? Now, in terms of, say, healthcare, ambulatory services, those sorts of things, that's people that work in recovery homes, nursing homes, and as Bill Clinton would say, old folks' homes, that provide those types of care options. A lot of them are immigrants because they're low paying and at the same time very demanding. One can hurt one's back, etc. So this is a situation we come up against in the U.S. But when you use immigrants or charging the border as a political issue, that's sort of like how Reagan used the welfare queen. That excites people like this 20-something character in New Zealand. He's originally from Australia. And of course it was fertile ground there. And the only thing Trump could say about it was, well, there's no danger from the right wing. There is a danger from the right wing, and it's a little bit more complicated. If you go back to 1976 in this country with Reagan, and Reagan was running against Gerald Ford at the time, and he also carried on the same types of stories. That in the 1980 race, he talked about a big buck. He was talking about an African male coming in and buying a steak with, at the time, food stamps or food sufficiency. It's called today. But nonetheless, this is the type of issue they framed. And for many years, the Republicans ran against welfare. They ran against busing and those kinds of issues, and they ran against abortions. They're still running against abortions. They ran against gay rights, these so-called social issues, but none have they trumped up or tapped up as the so-called immigrant issue, when in fact the number of people coming into the U.S. via the borders has declined, not increased. What we are seeing is more women and children coming in, and not the males. So this is a situation, and the Congress passed legislation to doom Trump's wall. So now he's going to, or he has vetoed the legislation. So the first in the House, they'll have to try to override it, and in the Senate, the votes perhaps are not there. So this is the ongoing saga. But the problem, back to Christchurch in New Zealand, is this type of propaganda that is further enhanced, or enhanced, I suppose is a very good word, on social media. And not only, when we say social media, that's pretty broad. We're talking Facebook, Twitter, etc. But there are other channels that right-wingers go to, and they talk about these issues. It doesn't have to be substantiated at all. But when we get it into a national campaign Trump and his people have to take responsibility for what happened in Falls Church, and also Christchurch, and also there's another situation involving the foreign policy of the U.S., Wilsonian foreign policy, or racist foreign policy that has used the whole idea of invading Venezuela and the power grid, and now it's pretty much universally brought to bear that the blackouts in Brazil were not caused by, in Venezuela, not by maintenance problems, they were cyber attack. And when we look at the Miami Herald and various other people, they have been as quiet as LBJ would say, church mice. They haven't had very much to say about the government of President Nicolas Maduro Moro, because they are investigating now that particular situation. But that is part of the whole idea of Wilsonian foreign policy, going and turning nations into a banana republic, as they try to do with Cuba in the Bay of Pigs. And now the Trump administration is blaming Cuba for what happened in Venezuela. Also, the Russian Federation announced through their foreign ministry that they would be assisting Venezuela along with China. So this is what has changed since the escapade in Grenada, the escapade in El Salvador and Guatemala. These little banana type of wars where CIA types, the Contras were there, mercenaries were there, and they'd send in these so-called foreign correspondents, most of whom were actually just CIA agents. That's all they were. But it's not as easy anymore because of technology, democratization of knowledge. I just heard an interview from Tim Berners-Lee, the man that invented the web. Thought I'd throw that one in real quickly there. But back to what the show is basically revolving around is this atmosphere of hate. It reminds one of this spectacular episode that Mike Wallace pulled out, and it was produced by an African-American journalist that went in to interview members of the Nation of Islam. It's about the hate that hate produced, but the point is the hate did not produce the Nation of Islam. That was the wrong title. But what has happened, this is now in various right-wing states. We've had attacks in the Mother Church in Charleston there by this guy Root. I think his name's Root. Anyway, and various others. What happened in Sweden, and these other characters that are attacking immigrants or communities of color. In the case of African Americans, the attack in Pittsburgh at the synagogue. All these things are related to this newfound nationalism, which in itself is a racist nationalism, but it extends beyond that to the Mideast and Palestine, that the Zionists there, and of course Zionism being racism, are allowed to kill Palestinians on virtually a daily basis there as part of quote-unquote their defense. Now, we saw in the case of Ms. Omar, the representative from Minnesota, that the Congress itself is draped in this sort of situation. So criticism of DJ Trump just bounces off the wall, basically speaking. And that's what you're having here. You can't have your cake and eat it too. If the Zionists in the Israeli state are allowed to kill people literally willy-nilly as part of their quote-unquote defense, and in the U.S. their lobbying groups are allowed to lobby on behalf of them and solicit funds by third parties, and when they come to in analysis by people like Ilhan Omar and various other people in the Congress, then they are attacked. And the people like the fellow in New Zealand see these attacks. So in other words, they're enablers. You have these Zionists that in New York, they're racist, and they take the racism that they have in New York, it's well known, and they take it to the Israeli state. So they look at the Palestinians as being subhuman. The same situation as the person in New Zealand looking at these people in the mosque as being subhuman. And by and large, these Zionist organizations and Zionists have not condemned the situation. Why have they not? Because they are racist. And they know who I'm talking about. They have had nothing to say about it at all. But when you look at people as subhuman, you create an atmosphere, particularly if you're dealing with nationalism. And that's what caused the church massacre in Charlotte, and also the situation in Pittsburgh. You can't turn the violence and the hate off like a tap on the water spigot. That just simply does not happen. So you'll see more of these types of attacks on people that are totally innocent. But it goes back to the perpetrators. It's sort of like the U.S. State Department won't give visas to the International Court that sits at The Hague because they want to investigate U.S. military types for war crimes. They also want to investigate the Israeli authorities for war crimes. And they are investigating them. This is where the whole paradigm is changing. There is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez bringing out these issues. There's Ms. Omar in Minnesota. There is a Sharita in Detroit. And various other commentators on Greenwald in Brazil. And various press outlets. But the other leg of this is the corporate media and their various talking heads, whether it be at CNN, MSNBC, Reuters. Incidentally took what was called a hit piece on Beto O'Rourke. Well, we don't select presidential candidates in this country out of hit pieces and let the corporate media influence us. Let me go to Uncle Carl and finish this up. We didn't originally we're going to take as much time as we have, but let me just see if I we also have Charlie Cook here that we'll present. Incidentally, we have a Numbers Man program also coming up very quickly here. And let me just see if we have... oops, Carl Rove is not where he should be. Here we go. I spent a lot of time talking about this, and nonetheless, he's writing in the Wall Street Journal. American history is told by AOC on the 14th. Austin's South by Southwest began as a music festival, a film festival, and a tech conference, but it became a popular stop for left-of-center politicos. This year, various people were there. Sandra Warren, Amy Klobuchar, hardly a left-wing person, Julian Castro, all spoke. Soon to be a White House hopeful, premiered a documentary, Beto O'Rourke. Didn't remember him. Well, he did a documentary. Anyway, South by Southwest rock star was AOC, who filled she overfilled it, 3,200 seat convention center. They also had overflow rooms, which she overflew. She is the Green New Deal advocate. Didn't arrive in a Pierce or one of the unique scooters that clogged the Austin streets during the festival. She came instead in an SUV. Well, so what? If she came in an SUV or a Prius, she could have arrived on her feet. Nonetheless, she was interviewed, and we played this. We had an episode, AOC at South by Southwest, Brianna Gray of Intercept, and he goes on to say this is a left-wing publication. She attacked racism, and we just laid that out. Capitalism on behalf of working people were applauded by the attendees. He's taken another dive there. Now, this is for a pass to all the events. $3,500 or $1,600, and that's a premier pass. There were cheaper accommodations. She dealt at length with America's pervasive racism, declaring the efforts to divide on race and class has always been a tool of the powerful to prevent everyday working people from taking control of the government. American leaders also help racist resentment to become legitimized as a political tool. We talked about that, so we won't go back to it. She also was a Reagan who in 1976 criticized a Chicago woman for bilking the system of $150,000, and the attack was rooted in a racism. Now, we'll get into a little bit of this, and also the representative of FDR's a bigot saying the New Deal was an extremely economically racist policy, and that is correct. There's a number of very good books written on this. Red lines around the black and brown communities, they did indeed. Basically, it invested in white America, no doubt about that. We'll call it European America. According to AOC, the New Deal allowed European Americans to access home loans that the black and brown did not have access to do. By doing so, accelerate a horrible racial wealth gap that persists today. Yet, and see, this study itself, and I was going to look at it, but we'll get back to it, showed that FDR's homeowner loan corp did not discriminate. The gap between African Americans and European home ownership remains around 20%. Yeah, this is not right. But anyway, the attacks on FDR exhibits another theme of AOC's appearance, the unique of a conspiracy action. As FDR's New Deal secretly discriminated. It wasn't secretly. They did. You could not get an FHA loan. Here's how this worked. It had a whole course on this. The way it worked was the real estate industry, and Trump's people were cited for this, but this was in home ownership, would steer African Americans deliberately away from the so-called white neighborhoods. And thus, if you could not get a realtor to provide those services to you, you had no chance at all of buying a home, and the banks were redlining. That's a known fact. For example, AOC told the crowd America's norms and systems and electoral systems are dominated by special interests, no doubt about that, dark money, and rules of seniority. Because the rich have taken away all of the guardrails of a responsible society, it doesn't feel good to live in America today. Moreover, we should be scared right now because corporations have taken over our government. There's no doubt about that. Nor do these businesses want to help themselves and the community onto capitalism. And she's not the only one saying this. There are literally hundreds of people, including people in the corporate sector, are talking about what is called inequality. So what Uncle Carl is doing is playing to the base. with a lot of distorted information. We seek and prioritize profit and accumulation of money above all else, and we seek, if any human and environmental costs, add any human. Our economic system is also based on a scarcity, which corporations have made artificial, sort of like the sanctions on Venezuela. We are driven to work 80 hours a week, when we are the most productive at any point in American history. If profits were skimming off and given to billionaires, we would be working less amounts. We have worked Marx's promise of the crowd applauded as she the 540 American millionaires who stole the money. X-rated. Anyway, this is Linda Thomas here, and I won't read all this. I'll just append this. Linda Thomas was a woman was prosecuted for so-called fraud in Chicago, and the attorney represented her was none other than Judge Pincham, as he was known. R. Eugene Pincham, very good trial lawyer. He was one of the lawyers that represented her. It was delayed several times. There's a picture here of Linda Taylor, and she is Carl. Old Uncle Carl was saying she was a European. She may have had traits of being a European, but if you look at her here, you can tell she's an African American. And according to the one drop law, that is what she was. Now, she had various Medicaid ID cards on the name of Connie Walker, Linda Burnett, and the FBI handwriting specialist said that 13 of Walker's Barnett signatures on them. These ADFDC checks ranging from, and not very much, $249 to $464 were definitely hers. The jury took 7 hours to find her guilty. The Judge Jones sentenced her to 2 to 6 years for theft and one count of perjury. Charles sometimes reported, this is actually a slate that reported that Taylor always poker-faced in court, had tears in her eyes. Well, I don't know about all that. But anyway, the behavior before and after, they tried to say she was a psychopath, suggested she take a psychiatric exam. It was never afforded to her. The petition for medical examination was ultimately denied in February of 1978. The welfare queen entered the Illinois Correction Institute, that's according to the Sun-Times, and as of March 1979, she had a minor violation on her prison record, having allegedly used state-owned equipment to make cushions and sell them. So she was entrepreneurial. Anyway, Linda Taylor disappeared from a newsprint, and by the end of the 70s, Taylor had become a historic footnote. No doubt about that. So that was the end of that. It took a crew of cops 20 hours to count all the this is about the policy king there in Chicago. What was his name? He was evidently Wakefield. He was evidently also part of her circle. And it's a long, drawn-out story here about her and her various places that she lived. Whether she's going by Constant Wakefield or Linda Taylor or any other names, the future welfare queen never went for subtlety. She was a woman of great ambition. She conjured a universe to which she forced an array against her were equally extraordinary. Someone who's always trying to kill her, well, I don't know. Anyway, And she even made it into probate court as Constance Wakefield, who claimed to be an illegitimate daughter of this Lawrence Wakefield. He was the policy king. The Times reported in 1964. Anyway, it goes on and on and on. Very, very long article here. Linda Taylor was a little girl on a farm in Mississippi County, Arkansas, according to the 1930 census. Whatever. They didn't have very good birth records at that time, so it just a whole situation that very difficult to determine. Light was good in Chicago for these people here. Anyway, Taylor's relationship with the policy king was not a total fantasy she conjured in a bid to get a dead man's money. Anyway, so she was there, and in fact, they show a picture of the home on Dement Avenue that Wakefield provided for Linda Taylor and her children. So it's a nice home there. So she actually was associated with the policy king. And various other people that Taylor, Linda did pull up one of them. Well, anyway, she was even accused of kidnapping someone. That was in 1964. Again, this is a policy king. She was associated with him, and she probably was from just reading the article. I spent quite a bit of time. This is a very long article, and I invite you to look at it. See if I can finish this thing up here, let's see. There's a picture of her in Florida, Linda Taylor in Florida, in the 80s. So evidently she was quite a person there. A lighter skinned person. She appeared in court though to be a darker skinned person. Oh well, very difficult to say what she was, but in the early 80s, Markham's, okay. I'm not sure who. And, okay. Mildred Markham died in Graceville, Florida, far away from home and her loved ones. Something else Taylor was involved in here. And some other people there. So she continued. Markham deeded some land to Linda Lynch, Linda's son. Anyway. So, I mean, this kind of goes on and on and on and on and on and on. She beat the system, and this leads to Bill Clinton ending welfare as we know it, and some of her many, many aliases here that she had: Martha Louise White, Constance Harborough, Linda Taylor Jones, Linda Ray. I mean, she was quite a character in terms of all these various names. Ronald Reagan regularly dusted off the welfare queen allure here, and but it's been expounded by various other characters on the scene, and it's just quite a story here, no doubt about that. Anyway, and also Paul Krugman wrote about it too. Now, this article here is the New Deal race and home ownership in the 20s and the 30s. This is just a paper, but this is one of many. Anyway, on a future report, we'll bring this up. So let's move on here. Investigators find the second piece of evidence in the crash of the Boeing 738 MAX 8 in Ethiopia. Very important here. A new piece of evidence found by the investigators. A new control system also suspecting the crash of a Lion Air that in October. Investigators found is known as a jack screw in the wreckage. A jack screw used to set the trim, but raises and lowers the plane's nose, indicating that the jet was configured to dive, as according to James Cox, a former pilot and airline safety consultant. Cox, formerly the top FAA safety officer for the Airlines Pilots Association. All we can say definitely is that the trim was in position similar to the position found on the Lion Air plane. So this brings into question a lot of things that are going on. The French Bureau of Inquisitions des Analyses, which has extensive experience in analyzing crashes in Europe, had worked to retrieve the information from the data recorder, has begun with the coordination of that in France. So this is basically the story here. It shows that Ethiopian Airline was in trouble almost immediately, struggling to gain altitude. And the big question here is, and we'll leave this story, is what and why did the FAA not ground this airliner here in the U.S.? Now back to our monologue that I had here, Boundless Racism, Zero Remorse, a manifesto of hate here, of this character here, Brenton Harris Tarrant. He was 28. He was arrested in Christchurch there, killing 49 people. The manifesto indicates that he moved to New Zealand to stage his alleged attack, which he had been planning for 2 years. His aim, he said, was to defend our land from invaders. It's the same language DJ Trump uses. He visited Pakistan and North Korea, where he was photographed by a group of tourists at the National Monument. He called Pakistan an incredible place filled with the most earnest, kind-hearted, and hospitable people in the world. Yet he declared himself a racist, a Euro-nationalist, eco-fascist in his manifesto. He had poems, diatribes against immigrants, Muslims, Jews, and religious converts. Compendium of, he said, Communist China was a nation with political and social values closer to his. Tarrant, who described himself as a regular, quote-unquote, white fellow from a regular family, said he did not hate foreigners or Muslims who lived in their own country, or in their homelands. I spent many years traveling through many nations, he wrote. I was treated wonderfully. The various cultures of the world greeted me with warmth and compassion, but he said immigrants were invaders who colonized other people's land. And according to The Independent, that's one of these tabloid newspapers in London, met with right-wing extremists during his visits to Europe. This is in 2017, and declared allegiance to a group called Europeans. His Twitter posts showed weapons covered with the name of military generals and mass shooters. Should have told you something right there. And his tweets, which Twitter deleted, the manifesto demonstrate a distance, non-conscience about carnage. He was planning, tweeting saying Soviet and American troops meeting in Berlin, linked to the SpongeBob SquarePants, anyway, I'm not sure, character in the Burning City. Another tweet a video of an attack helicopter shooting at what appeared to be a Mideast town, no doubt in Palestine. This is where all of this stuff comes together here, and for more than perhaps any other alleged mass shooting in recent times. The author of this manifesto spells out the roots of extremism in detail. He said he was inspired by the British fascist Oswald Mosley, remember him, and other mass shooters. The guy in Norway, Anders Brokovic, and Delana Root in Charleston, South Carolina, 4 years ago. Tarrant claimed he contacted anti-immigrant groups called the Reborn Knights of the Templar and got a blessing from the attack from right-wing extremists. That's in Pervak in Oslo. Pervak's lawyer told the Norwegian paper VG that his client, who is in prison, has very limited contact with the surrounding world, so it seemed very unlikely that he had contacted him. He quoted Dylan Thomas and Rudyard Kipling. He railed against the pop stars in Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Freddie nihilistic and Freddie Mercury. Freddie Mercury passed not long ago. The worldview seems cobbled together from scraps he found on the web, and other details about his life indicate he was deeply involved in online subculture. News accounts in Australia said Tarrant told acquaintances he funded his travels by money from BitConnect. That's a cyber currency similar to Bitcoin. Organized white supremacists and some others are banned from using PayPal. So they are now in the cyber currency racket also. So we won't spend any more time on him. In another development here, Bernie Sanders' staff is unionizing. The first in history that that's happened. All the campaign workers below the rank of deputy director will be represented by the United Food and Commercial Workers Union Local 400. The union said, adding that it will start negotiating a collective bargaining agreement as soon as possible. The UCFW Local 400's president said in a statement, we expect this will mean pay parity and transparency on the campaign, with no gender bias or harassment, equal treatment of every worker, whether they're in D.C., Iowa, New York, New Hampshire, wherever else. The Sanders campaign applauded the move to unionize its members. Jonathan Williams, the communications director, said it was not asked if the efforts to unionize was in response to Jonathan Williams. Said it was not the spokesman. This is Sanders spokesman, did not immediately reply to comments there. The campaign, built to last just a month, a couple of years, has rarely featured organized labor forces. In 2017, staff from the Wisconsin candidate Randy Boyce organized with the campaign Workers Guild. Boyce called it the first campaign to unionize. Many of the candidates vying for the Democratic presidential nomination, including Sanders, have been compelled to position themselves as champion of working class America. Well, and that is an interesting situation. Will DJ Trump's scab campaign unionize? I doubt it very seriously. Amy Walter, her program on National Public Radio, I was listening at someone was talking about the working class and how DJ Trump appealed to them. Well, Trump's appeal to the working, so-called European working class and others primarily is a nationalist campaign, and not only that, based upon America First That's a Nazi slogan there. And bringing back jobs to the country, very mixed there. Many of these jobs were created, like the auto plant in Ohio has now closed. And various other so-called opportunities were out there, particularly in the auto sector, have been up and down and have actually lost people. So, in other words, what we're talking about here is a pie in the sky type of thing. And in the Walters piece, they also talked about Reagan, and that's why we're tying this all up for this broadcast. This crass racism out there, the whole immigrant, boogie person, a man, woman, you used to call it the boogie man syndrome put out here, and the idea of the Democratic Party centering people like Ilhan Omar and turning her into the boogie woman, and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. These exemplify what is actually going on here. The Congress has not pointed anyone out for stating a fact. Now, this clown out of, where is he out of? Iowa, King, had made white supremacist statements for years. And he finally got stripped of some committees, but they didn't strip him when the Republicans were in the majority. Or it was at the end when they were leaving it, it would be January. If they did strip him, it would have been in December of after the November elections. He made a statement about white supremacy statement. He'd made that before. That's just stock and trade. So this is where you have it in these campaigns. Now, when you talk about media outlets, the corporate media taking a hit on Beto O'Rourke that announced his campaign in a video. We had that last night on Friday Jobber. And are we going to permit, as we wind down the broadcast here, are we going to permit these corporate entities, whether it be Reuters, CNN, to define this presidential campaign? There's a lot of talk about so-called Russian interference, and we'll do a special program on that. And we'll get into some of it on the Open Source Report, which does come this week. I know we've been doing this for 6 weeks now. And we have a Numbers Man report that's also coming up, and it does come up every week. Incidentally, on BR on the World, we had President Nicolas Maduro speaking on Anti-Imperialist Day. So what is happening here is all of these issues are being internationalized. Even Tarrant has internationalized the violence against people. DJ Trump nationalized his campaign, but his campaign is effectively being internationalized. And that is something the corporate media is having a very hard time dealing with. Venezuela, a very good example. They lied. BBC lied. Reuters lied. They all came up with this scheme that the Bolivarian government were the ones that set the trucks alight. It was an absolute lie. It was set alight from the Colombian side of the border by supporters of Juan Guaido. It was the ones that did this. Now Guaido hasn't been seen very much lately. He said, well, maybe we'll invite the military in. At his chances, he'll invite him in. But this is this whole deal that now you have it there. And on the Korean Peninsula, Democratic Republic of Korea, under Chairman has said they may restart their nuclear enterprise. So in other words, that whole thing is up in the air. And Trump this week did veto the bill passed by Congress. So all this is out there, and we'll have it. Charlie Cook, incidentally, we'll put that on the Monday morning quarterback. Simply, we just running too long here. And we'll have the St. Patty's Day festivities. We always talk about St. Patty's Day in terms of where the Irish people stood in the world and the working class, because The Irish were the working class and still the working class in the U.S. We'll talk about some of those activities there and how Irish people and African Americans were united at one time, and the elusive situation under President Barack Obama, who was part Irish, became back to prominence. Many of the American presidents have been Irish, including Reagan, not Trump, he's German, and so was G.W. Bush and the Bushes. Anyway, let's do the sports now. We'll go, let's see what we'll do first here. NBA basketball, the Lakers were at the Pistons. Pistons are 111-97. The 76ers 123-114 over the Kings. The Hornets 116-110 over the Wizards. The Bucks 113-98 over the Heat. The Suns and the Rockets, well, the Rockets 108-102 over the Suns. The Trailblazers 122-110 over the Pelicans. The Spurs 109-83 over the Knicks and Knickerbockers. And the Clippers in Los Angeles 128-121 over the Bulls. To Major League Baseball, we'll be getting some games tomorrow. And on St. Patty's Day, Twins 12-9 over the Orioles. Yankees 14-1 over the Red Sox. The Rays 7-3 over the Tigers. And the Marlins 7-6 over Atlanta. The Phillies 3-2 over the Blue Jays. Nationals 11-3 over the Mets. The Angels and Giants all tied up. The Cubbies 11-9 over the White Sox. And Cleveland lost to the Rangers 5-2. The Padres and the Brewers 6-2. Kansas City and the Rockies, well, the Rockies pulled this one out 2-1. The D-backs and Angels, it was Angels 2-1. The Astros and Cards, it was all Astros 11-2 over the Cards. The split squad, the Cardinals and Astros, well, I guess they played 2 games. Anyway, the Astros won the second one also 5-0. Not sure what that deal was. Rays and Pirates 6-6. And the Dodgers 8-1 over the Reds. On to the National Hockey League here. Well, we need to get the scores, don't we? We will. Oops. Well, that was soccer. Anyway, to women's college basketball. Who do we have here? 2 games, actually. Drake 86-58 over Vest. I can't even pronounce the name now. Anyway, to 58 over Vespasiano. Anyway, I'm not sure why I'm not pronouncing. And Rice was 64-58. Valparaiso. Finally got it. Anyway, on to men's college basketball. I pick pronunciation course here. Florida State 69-59 over Virginia. Duke 74-73 over North Carolina. Kentucky 73-55 over Alabama, and Michigan State 77-70 over Ohio State. Tennessee 83-76 over Mississippi State, and Florida 76-73 over LSU, and Michigan 74-53 over Iowa. UConn lost to Houston 84-45, and Purdue lost to Minnesota 75-73. San Diego State 65-54 56 over Nevada. Iowa State was a victor, 63-59 over Kansas State. West Virginia lost to Kansas, 88-74. Central Michigan in Buffalo, it was Buffalo, 85-81. Nebraska and Wisconsin, Wisconsin pulled it out, 66-62. Auburn and South Carolina was Auburn, 73-64. Seton Hall and Marquette. Seton Hall 81-79. High scoring game there. SMU and Cincy. Cincy 82-74. And in overtime, Xavier and Villanova. Villanova 71-67. Was that Villanova we mispronounced before that? I have to go back here and... Valparaiso. Anyway, I think we'd get it sooner or later here. We have to get something going. That is the sport. We got to do one more. They kind of get to the National Hockey League here finally. We don't want to leave the National Hockey League out. Wait just a second here. Have to kill the sound. We did. The Flyers and Maple Leafs. Maple Leafs 7-6. The Hurricanes and Blue Jackets. Blue Jackets 3-0. The Golden Knights 2-1 over the Stars. The Ducks of Anaheim 5-3 over the Avalanche. The Rangers and Flames. It was the Flames 5-1. And finally, the Devils and Canucks. It was the Devils 3-2. So we finally do it for the sports. We'll see you on the Monday morning quarterback on Monday morning, on St. Paddy's Day tomorrow, on Sunday, and Numbers Man somewhere in between, all from WBRN Radio and the Boston Red Network. This is Boston Red on the 16th of March, 2019. And as we come in here with the famous anti-racist warrior, fighter, Stetson Kennedy, we remember him, his heroic battles in Florida. And of course, at the same time, you had a senator actually in the early Florida there named Claude Red Pepper, and later he was a representative, a champion of seniors, Claude Pepper, out of Jacksonville. Have a good weekend, everyone. Good day.